Along with the superhero subgenre, I think it's safe to say that the horror genre is my favorite. From early silent films like The Golem and Nosferatu to the science fiction boom of the 1950s, giving birth to films like Godzilla and The Blob, horror has always been at the forefront of the film industry, ever since the medium's inception. But in the realm of video games, horror is nowhere near as prestigious. I think this is due largely to the unfortunate fact that as well as horror being, in my opinion, the most important genre, it's also the easiest to do poorly. Take one look at the movie aisle in your local Walmart, and you'll see that for every Hellraiser and Shaun of the Dead, there's 400 big-ass spiders. And the same holds true for video games. One look at Steam's catalog will show you that for every Resident Evil and Silent Hill, there are 400 games trying to be the next Five Nights at Freddy's. Not that there's anything wrong with liking Five Nights at Freddy's, I too am guilty of spending hours deep diving into MatPat's theories. But a wise man once said, "Jump scares are the fart jokes of horror." And I find that to be astonishingly accurate. So in this video, I want to forego the jump scares and highlight two games that I think exemplify what the genre is truly capable of. It's a double feature, if you will.
Round one.
Violence in video games has always been a heavily debated topic. But while politicians and parent groups worked their asses off to put a ban on these early violent video games, their kids were in arcades playing Splatterhouse. Released by Namco in 1988, Splatterhouse was a game changer. In it, players took control of Rick Taylor, the terror mask-wearing man on a mission to save his girlfriend Jennifer from the clutches of the evil Dr. Henry West. To do that, he's got to fight through hordes of demonic creatures, using anything at his disposal to cut, gut, and shoot his way through the West Mansion. Gameplay-wise, it was just your typical side-scrolling beat-em-up, though the lack of an isometric plane of movement, as seen in later games like Narc and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, forced more of an emphasis on precision combat rather than effective crowd control. And while I find the gameplay to be very satisfying, the real breakthrough here is in the game's atmosphere and presentation. To put it in perspective, Mortal Kombat wouldn't be released for another 4 years after Splatterhouse. Before it, the most violent video game to hit arcades was Death Race. Yes, this at one point was considered controversial. Oh, how the mighty have picked up a 2x4. This first Splatterhouse was ported to the TurboGrafx 16 and received 2 sequels, exclusively for the Genesis, as well as the cutesy spin-off Wanpaku Graffiti for the Famicom. After that, though, the series would seemingly go dormant. That is, until 2010. A whole 3 years before Namco would lose their fucking minds, they released what Splatterhouse fans had been clamoring for. A remake. And holy shit is it awesome. Again, players take control of Rick Taylor as he dons the terror mask to save Jen from the clutches of the evil Dr. Henry West. Only this time, the story is far more detailed, providing answers to long-asked questions like, who is Dr. West? What is the terror mask? What does Rick look like without the mask? Shit the other games hinted at, or merely glossed over, is put on full display in the remake. You begin the game with zero context. As soon as you press start, Rick is already drowning in a pool of his own blood. A voice calls out to him,
"She doesn't have to die."
A line itself taken directly from the opening of Splatterhouse 2. The voice introduces itself.
Who am I? Let's just say I'm God. Your God. At least the only God that's listening right now.
The voice, now obviously tied to the mask, convinces Rick to put it on.
What do I want? Same as any God. A little faith. For without faith, I am nothing. And without me, you're fucked.
So Rick dons the mask, and the game begins. Without going too in-depth, I'd like to take a moment to examine the game's overall story structure. Now, what I'm going to try to explain here is a little complex, and if there is an easier way for me to explain it, then I apologize. But please bear with me. This infinite line represents the Splatterhouse timeline. Not the timeline of the game, but the timeline of its world. This is where the game starts, and this is where the game ends. Notice all this shit that goes off to the left and right. Now, it's not just blank space, because just as the real world existed long before you came along, and will continue to exist long after you're gone, the same is true for fictional worlds in regards to their main character. It's also important to note that every story is told from a perspective, and just as you are undoubtedly the main character from your own perspective, you are most likely not the main character from anyone else's perspective. Now, why is this relevant? This line represents the story of Dr. Henry West, the villain of the game. This is when he's born, this is when he dies. Snapping that into the timeline, we see that this game takes place at the end of his story, though not at the very end. Let me just pull these up so you can see the plot structure. The entirety of this game's story takes place during the climax of the villain's story, which serves not only to give the player a sense of tunnel vision, as they're thrust into this lore-rich world, given only scraps to service the story at hand, but also keep that story incredibly focused amidst its chaotic backdrop. It's like the game's telling you, there's something deeper here. But you don't have time for that. Rip them apart.
So much suffering. It's beautiful. Kill it!
As you play through the game, you'll get flashbacks to the events leading up to the opening, but not too long before, with the earliest taking place maybe 15 or so minutes before the opening. On top of the cutscenes and dialogue, which I will get to later, there are audio recordings from Dr. West's journal, hidden around a lot of the levels, that offer a bit more insight into the Doctor's experiments.
Problem. Subject's screams disturb my concentration while I'm working. Solution? Sew up the mouth or sever the vocal cords.
As well as spicy photographs of Jen that can be collected and pieced together to give more context to Rick and Jen's relationship. And who doesn't love some PS3-era booby? Also, for every 5% of the game you manage to complete, you'll get a new journal entry accessible in the collectibles menu that'll fill you in on all this. Now for those of you who are saying, Ryan, if I cared about the story, I'd read a book. Never fear, because to that I say, storytelling is an art. And video games are a valid medium to express that art. And also, you're in luck, because just like the other games in this series, the story takes a backseat to gameplay. It's there if you want it, but the primary focus is always on gameplay. And dialogue, but I'll touch on that later. So how does the game play? Well, if I'm being honest, like dog shit. For the first 2 hours, then it's awesome. It's your typical 3D brawler, and as such, you'll be fighting your way through seemingly endless hordes of enemies, largely with your bare hands. There's also a fair amount of weapons, ranging from a rusty 2x4 to a double-barreled shotgun. These weapons, the shotgun especially, are really satisfying to use, but if you're not careful, could leave you vulnerable on wind-up or reload. Unlike its predecessors, 3 excluded, Splatterhouse 2010 focuses heavily on crowd control. It's very easy to get overwhelmed, and the best move you have to counter isn't unlocked until further on. So in the early stages, expect to do a lot of splatter siphoning. That's the game's way of getting health back. By pressing L1 and O, on PlayStation at least, Rick can siphon life from the enemies around him. This, however, costs necro energy. In the upper left-hand corner, you've got your health bar, and below that is the necrometer. You fill this by killing enemies and spilling their blood, which in turn will allow you to use some special moves. Or, if you get it full enough, go full-on berserker mode. A fairly effective way to fill the meter is to perform splatter kills. These are choreographed QTEs that you can use to dispatch problematic enemies. What happens is, if you damage an enemy enough, it'll turn red. Then, if you grab it, the sequence will initiate, allowing you to brutally kill it without having to worry about the other enemies interrupting you.
I love it when they scream. It makes it so much more fun. You know, I've seen sphincters before, and there's another one.
Despite how fun it can be, there are 3 big problems you'll run into when playing Splatterhouse for the first time. First is the controls. Now, I'm sure you've heard it before, but I'll say it again. Controls are hard to explain. But what isn't hard to explain is which buttons do what. And this is where Splatterhouse immediately falls flat on its face. Mechanics like blocking and splatter siphoning are taught to the player way too late, and on your first playthrough, you will undoubtedly die a lot due to this poor design. And the more you die, the more you'll notice the game's abnormally long load times. So the majority of the first half hour is spent dying and waiting and dying and waiting, which I think is what turned most early reviewers off to this game. Not to mention that while there is a lot that Rick can do, most of it has to be unlocked. So for the first few hours, combat can feel extremely simple. But as the game goes on and the difficulty amps up, the combat system evolves with it to allow for more dynamic combat, and towards the end, becomes an absolute blast. I'd compare the combat in Splatterhouse to that of Insomniac's Spider-Man, in the sense that it takes a second to get good at it, but once you get it, you get it. shifting combat from a frustrating button masher to what I've referred to before as a beautiful dance of death. The game gives off big Kingdom Hearts 2 energy as well, in the sense that it leads with its worst foot forward.
I'll show you.
But, given the time to learn how to walk, it'll eventually be able to sprint up to you, grab you by the face, and slam you into the floor. In a good way. And as I said, once you get past that 2-hour mark, it becomes incredibly satisfying to just tear through grotesque hordes of enemies with your bare hands, or a trusty 2x4. And you'll be doing it all to one of the greatest licensed soundtracks ever brought to gaming. Metalheads rejoice. We're talking Goat Whore, ASG, Lamb of God, Five Finger Death Punch, and more. It never gets old. And puts you in the perfect mood to
Paint the walls red.
Now, voice acting in video games, horror games in particular, has always been
to protect the life cycle.
shoddy at best, which is another area in which Splatterhouse goes above and beyond, casting legendary voice actor Jim Cummings as the voice of the Terror Mask.
Show him why we call it Splatterhouse.
Which leads me to what I believe is the single greatest part of this game, because as satisfying as the gameplay gets, as in-depth as the story goes, and as kick-ass as the soundtrack is, they all pale in comparison to the dialogue.
I will tear down the gates of heaven to find you, Lenora, and I shall reach them on a stairway built from the stacked corpses of the good people of Arkham.
If you're planning on writing a movie, or a video game, or a TV show, or anything of that nature at any point in your life, I highly recommend you play this game, or at the very least watch a playthrough, if for nothing else just to experience the dialogue. Sometimes comical,
Welcome to Dr. West's Handjob Dungeon.
sometimes serious,
Did you ever tell her about that little psychology sophomore you got it on with last Halloween? Oh.
I was drunk. You don't think I regret that?
See? If a square Joe like you can do something bad once, then don't it follow that something like me can be capable of doing something good? Duality, see? That's what I'm talking about.
either way, it's always a highlight.
This girl of yours.
Jen.
Whatever. You once told her you'd love her until the end of the world. It's time to prove it, Rick. The end of the world is coming.
The environments in Splatterhouse are hit or miss. When they miss, the levels aren't bad, but incredibly bland. The most prominent examples being levels 3 and 5. But when it hits, the game can provide some truly eerie environments, managing to utilize lighting, sound effects, and dialogue in an effective manner.
What the hell is that?
It's nothing, kid. Just a trick of the light.
Some standout areas are the Carnival, the Meat Factory, the Wicker Man, and the interior of the West Mansion. Strewn about these areas are also a ton of references to the original games, and other horror franchises, like A Nightmare on Elm Street, Child's Play, and Evil Dead. Another part of the presentation that I think is worth mentioning is the health system. Of course, you've got your health bar in the corner, but you can also tell how fucked up you are based on how much flesh is still attached to Rick's body, which I thought was a really cool touch. Despite what I may have led you to believe, this is not a perfect game. There are technical problems out the wazoo. Long load times, frequent audio glitches, and constant frame rate dips rivaling that of Turok Evolution plague this game. And the final boss is a complete pushover, even on the hardest difficulty. But none of that really hinders my enjoyment of this game. For me, it's a must-own. And if what's been presented so far wasn't enough, the game comes with the original 3 Splatterhouse games on disc, ready to play in all their gruesome glory, making this the most concise and cost-effective way to experience the entire franchise. That alone elevates Splatterhouse to God tier. Or, at least, the only God that's listening right now tier.
Round 2. I know you, Razier. You are worthy. Become my Soul Reaver, my angel of death.
Vampires are a staple of the horror genre, from classic depictions set forth by the likes of Bela Lugosi and Christopher Lee, to their more contemporary interpretations. Vampires have gotten plenty of representation in media, video games included, but most of these depictions have been more on the traditional side. You know, where the vampire wears a cape, lives in a castle, and turns into a bat. And there's nothing wrong with that. Toss in some Super Castlevania 4 and I'm kicking ass. But what if
Show yourself, creature.
vampires
Do you not recognize me, brother?
were Lovecraftian?
Am I so changed?
Yup, that'll do it. Soul Reaver. To put it lightly, the game was a technical marvel. With it, Crystal Dynamics set out to create a story-rich, horror-themed action-adventure puzzle platformer with a fully 3D open world and 0 load times. And that's not even the crazy part, because they did it all on the PlayStation 1. Yeah, this game was released in 1999, 2 years before me. And in case that story-rich part got you nervous, I'd like to introduce you to this lady, Amy Hennig. She wrote the story for this game, as well as both of these, so you know we're in the best of hands. Taking place in the desecrated land of Nosgoth, humanity is all but extinct. The vampire lord Cain has made sure of that. But in the centuries since his turn, something in him has begun to change. No doubt a side effect of his prolonged vampirism, Cain begins to genetically evolve. His first lieutenant Raziel soon follows suit, only his evolution surpasses Cain's. For this transgression, Raziel is stripped of his wings, quite literally, and cast into the lake of the dead to rot for all eternity. But centuries later, he's resurrected as a wraith, which is an undead vampire, which vampires in and of themselves are already undead, so Raziel is now double undead. And as such, his thirst has grown far deeper. No longer sustained by blood, Raziel must consume the souls of his victims. But great costs reap greater rewards, and Raziel's new form allows him to travel both the material plane as well as the spiritual. And this is the game's biggest mechanic. By pressing select, you'll be given access to Raziel's glyphs. These are magical abilities that Raziel can obtain by solving puzzles in various elemental shrines hidden across Nosgoth. The first and most important of these is accessible from the start, and that is Raziel's ability to shift from the material plane to the spiritual, and vice versa, though shifting back to the material can only be done at designated points. Using this power, Raziel sets out on a quest for vengeance, with eyes for the souls of his brothers, the remaining 5 lieutenants, as appetizers, and the soul of Cain, his creator, the main course. To do so, you'll need to explore the land of Nosgoth, which has changed a lot since Raziel's murder. Centuries have passed, and the clans have pushed Nosgoth into further ruin. The environments here are expertly crafted to give off a feeling of hopelessness. The land feels dead, but in a way that allows you to also feel the life that it once had. Like walking through a battlefield, still thick with fog and riddled with corpses, even long after the last shot was fired. The world sets the tone perfectly, and the game encourages you to explore every bit of it, often hiding upgrades far off the beaten path. There are entire areas you will never need to visit for the story, but by searching every nook and cranny of the map, you'll be rewarded with extra dialogue, power-ups, glyphs, and some incredibly immersive world building. When I first discovered the human stronghold, I was enamored by its intricate design, and the thought that I easily could have gone the whole game entirely unaware of its existence. Now, remember when I said this game has an open world? Well, technically, it has two. When Raziel shifts from the material plane to the spiritual, the world around him distorts, shifting the level geometry, which is used a lot in platforming, and entirely altering the way some elements work in relation to him. For example, playing off some older folklore that depicts vampires as unable to cross running water, contact with water on the material plane will kill Raziel, as well as other vampires. However, on the spiritual plane, water holds no weight and can be walked through as if it were air. Though this weightlessness affects Raziel as well, as being on the spiritual plane prevents him from directly affecting things existing on the material plane. It's a fun mechanic that has players balancing between maneuverability and interactivity at every given moment, and is used a lot in puzzle solving. And when I say kill Raziel, I'm being a little hyperbolic, because for all intensive purposes, Raziel cannot die. Rather, should he be defeated on the material plane, he'll be forced to retreat to the spiritual, where he'll need to regain his health before shifting back. This is a genius mechanic, because it strongly encourages experimentation. Instead of punishing the player for dying, the game rewards the player for trying, by giving them just short enough of a breather to assess what they did wrong and develop a new strategy. which as you play gradually becomes more necessary, especially during the boss fights, which are less full-on fights than they are giant puzzles that are trying to kill you. In fact, I'd say most of the combat in Soul Reaver is more puzzle solving than anything. Since you're fighting vampires, regular attacks can't do much but stun them. From there, you'll need to use your environment to either impale, burn, or drown them. There are multiple ways of doing this. Burning, for example, can be done by luring vampires to sunlight, igniting them with a torch, or just full-on yeeting them into a nearby fire. There's also the fire glyph, that, once found, can be used to instantly set all enemies around you ablaze, provided you have enough MP to cast it. With each vampire you kill, you'll have the opportunity to reave their soul, hence the name of the game. This sees Raziel consume the soul to regain health, regardless of how much health you have. If you're able, it's always a good idea to reave the soul of a downed enemy, 'cause if you don't, there's a chance that enemy might come back as a wraith, which will give it the ability to drain your health without even touching you. This doesn't happen at random though, and for the most part, every time you face a wraith, it's your own fault. For example, pulling a pike from the corpse of a vampire whose soul you left intact will allow the soul to re-inhabit its body, bringing it back as a wraith. There are also certain puzzles that require you to drain water from an area. If you've previously drowned a vampire in that area and not reaved its soul, draining the water will then allow it to come back to life, though burning the body is always a safe bet. Those motherfuckers aren't getting back up. As well as basic enemies, you'll also need to reave the souls of the bosses, which are the 5 remaining lieutenants and Kane. It's always entertaining to reunite with one of your brothers and see just how they've been since they, helped murder you.
Melchiah? Yes, brother.
Every fucking time. These reunions are my favorite part of the game. Getting to see the various unique ways your vampire brethren have evolved over the centuries is incredibly fascinating, and I won't spoil any of it here. By reaving their souls, you'll gain access to important abilities that range from phasing through gateways on the spiritual plane to scaling walls on the material plane. On top of these siphoned abilities, Raziel has a few tricks of his own, like high jumping and gliding, and most importantly, his possession of the Soul Reaver, hence the name of the game, again. See that blue lightsaber thing emanating from his hand? That is the Soul Reaver, a wraith blade bound to Raziel by the Elder God, upon the destruction of the blade's physical form. This blade is very powerful, and your best bet when combating enemies, though its connection to the material plane is weak, and thus, while always being present in the spiritual realm, it can only manifest itself on the material plane when Raziel is at full health. But, while manifested, it will sustain Raziel, preventing his health from diminishing, as it slowly does when not consuming souls, while also providing him with a means for higher damage output, kind of like a more intense version of being able to shoot with the sword in Zelda. There's also a hidden upgrade later on that allows you to imbue the blade with fire, offering yet another way for you to incinerate your enemies. There are a lot of mechanics at work here, and they all work off one another in a satisfying and effective way. In stark contrast to the kill first, ask questions later nature of Splatterhouse, Soul Reaver is very slow-paced. The game wants you to stop and think, survey your environment, and develop a plan of action. Raziel is no Rick Taylor, and nowhere is this more apparent than in the controls. The controls are very stiff, which, while in this particular instance I would say is a good thing, for reasons I'll get to later, can make certain platforming sections a slog of trial and error. Thankfully, these sections aren't too prevalent, and gliding tends to provide you with ample room for error. The reason I say stiff controls are a good thing is based purely in Soul Reaver's design. Don't get me wrong, stiff controls are usually a bad thing, especially in platformers. And given that Super Mario 64, the game that revolutionized how 3D platformers controlled, released 3 years prior to Soul Reaver, the only reason it should control any differently is if the team behind it were entirely incompetent or the game itself was built to accommodate it. Can you guess which one it is? If you guessed incompetence, you're calling the kettle black, because I have yet to speak negatively about this game, which is expertly designed with purposeful movement in mind, and the stiff controls serve to enforce that. While less prevalent in platforming, as I stated before, usually being given a comfortable window for error, that window is drastically constricted during combat. Press square 4 times instead of 3, you're gonna pay for that. This makes the combat distinctly methodical, as despite referring to them as such, there really are no base enemies. Each one is a threat in and of itself. A threat that you'll have to utilize every mechanic at your disposal to deal with. It's top-notch design. Something that the soundtrack and character designs are on par with. Just listen to some of this shit. all very atmospheric, and is complemented by some truly gruesome character design. Just look at Raziel. He has no jaw. That's fucking metal as fuck. But he isn't a silent protagonist. So my only question is, how on earth does he talk? In an interview with Amy Hennig, she said that he simply has very strong vocal cords. And while it is a funny response, I'd have preferred it followed up by a genuine explanation, because that one doesn't quite mesh well with the tone of the story. I mean, even MediEvil, while being admittedly more cartoonish, was able to pull this off more convincingly in '97. But I understand why it was necessary to not impede the character's speech, because the dialogue in this game is really, really good, and serves as a main catalyst for the story. Now I want to make this clear because after my Gargoyles Quest review I had a couple people ask me whether or not I actually liked that game. Since, while I did criticize it a lot, apparently calling it an overlooked classic wasn't indicative enough of my opinion. I'm allowed to poke fun at things and still enjoy those things. Now to wrap it up. Though I won't spoil anything, I will say there's a twist ending, and it is immaculate, and will no doubt have you scrambling to play the sequel. So I recommend you buy them both. Even though, as of this recording, I have yet to finish Soul Reaver 2, there's already so much that I love about it. Speaking of sequels and twist endings, there's still one thing I haven't told you, and that is that Soul Reaver itself is a sequel to 1996's Blood Omen, The Legacy of Kain. That game saw players take control of Kain in his early days of vampirism, as he wages a one-man war on the people of Nosgoth. The game had two endings. A good ending that saw Kain give up his immortality to save Nosgoth, and a bad ending that saw Kain retain his immortality and plunge Nosgoth into ruin. Can you guess which ending is canon?
Once I embraced my powers, I realized that Vorador was correct. We are gods. Dark gods. And it is our duty to thin the herd.
It should go without saying that I love this concept. Being able to see through the eyes of a new protagonist, the direct result of your actions carried over from the previous game, it all makes for some great storytelling.
I am your creation, Kain. Now, as before, you criticize your own work.
Whenever I'm asked about my favorite games, Splatterhouse always comes up. But typically, I avoid talking about Soul Reaver. Because, until now, I've always felt it really hard to explain just what exactly it is. Honestly, I've never played anything like it. It's as if they combine the gameplay and puzzle solving of Tomb Raider with the boss mechanics of Mega Man. Built it on a lore-rich and intricate open world with the level design and time-shifting mechanics of the Sands of Time, all wrapped up in a story that feels like the love child of Clive Barker and H.P. Lovecraft. Actually, when I put it like that, I think I finally know how to describe this game. A masterpiece.